Okay, so I'm gonna just jump into the notes. I'm not gonna give a background on Baldwin. We kind of went through that last week. So for me, what ultimately stands out when you first engage the text is the opening, right? How he starts the letter, and he states, "Dear James, I've begun this letter 5 times and tore it up 5 times." So to me, one, we could assume, right, that this is the sixth attempt at producing the fifth or the sixth attempt at producing the reading of the text, but also the intentionality and um, the need for perfection, right? Like he's starting over, and he wants to make sure that he gets it right. And he wants to make sure that what he conveys is conveyed clearly. Also, the vulnerability in him starting the essay off this way or the letter off this way. No one could argue in our time that Baldwin is recognized as one of the greatest American writers. And to hear someone of his stature talk about having to restart, 5 times, for me is generative as a writer, as a thinker. It just shows you that perfection doesn't come easy. The restart is oftentimes necessary. Um, then he kind of shifts the conversation, and he dives into this triangulation between the nephew James, his father, um, which is Baldwin's brother, and then Baldwin's father, which is the nephew's grandfather. And he mentions how you guys, your dad and you, kind of look like my father, kind of have the same disposition as my father, right? But then he shifts the focus to his father. And if you know any of Baldwin's work, particularly the book Go Tell It on the Mountain, which is also a film, the father in Baldwin's life has a very pervasive nature. He's very abusive, he's very demanding, and he does a phenomenal job of tearing down Baldwin's self esteem. And due to this, Baldwin has a great disdain for his father. You can kind of hear that play out in what I'm about to read. He is dead. He never saw you, and he had a terrible life. He was defeated long before he died because, at the bottom of his heart, he really believed what white people said about him. Right? So he's noticing that this is the thing that destroyed his father. And he seeks to warn his nephew, don't fall victim to that same trap. In fact, I seen your father, my brother, go through something similar, right? And he says, um, I know what the world has done to my brother and how narrowly he has survived it. And I know, which is much worse, and this is the crime of which I accuse my countrymen, and for which neither I, nor time, nor history will ever forgive them, that they have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives and do not know it and do not want to know it. Right. So that's the problem Baldwin is taking up with his country and his countrymen. Right. But he also warns his nephew, thinking about what happened to his father. You can only be destroyed by believing that you really are what the white world calls a nigger, right? So once you buy into this concept and you begin to see yourself through the lens, through the gaze of whiteness, at that point you signed your deathbed. You signed your defeat, right? So he accuses his country and his countrymen of destroying hundreds of thousands of lives. Okay, this is his issue. But he continues. He says, but it is not permissible that the authors of devastation should also be innocent. It is the innocence which constitutes the crime. I'm going to read that one more time. But it is not permissible. What is it? What does permissible mean? What is permissible?
Allowable.
Allowable. Thank you, Jelani. So it's not allowable. It's not okay. It's not authorized that the authors of devastation should also be innocent. So who are the authors of devastation, according to Baldwin? Who are the authors of devastation? So if you go up a little, I'm sorry, go ahead.
White people.
Say it again, Nathaniel.
The white people.
Yep, that's the authors of devastation, right? He says his country and his countrymen. So America and people who identify as white, okay? So it's not permissible that these white folks, that this white country should also be innocent. It is the innocence which constitutes the crime. What is he saying in that last part? It is the innocence which constitutes the crime. Think about the pillars of white inferiority. What does that mean?
Belief in this false history, this false narrative that, you know, of white supremacy and you know, black inferiority. But, you know, yes, the pillars of white entertainment and just making it, masking everything and having everybody believe in this history as well.
Yep. And then more importantly, right, due to this history, have everyone understand and believe that you are innocent. That's the problem, right? What this makes me think about is, I don't know how many of y'all are in conversations around race with white folks, and they will resort to this tactic of, well, this was before my time, right? That was so long ago. I didn't do that to your people, right? So what Baldwin is saying is like, yeah, I get that. I'm not charging you for that. That's not what my concern is. My concern is the fact that you play innocent in all this. It's the innocence which constitutes the crime, right? That's the problem. So yeah, I get it. That's history that happened long ago, granted. But don't sit up here in front with me like you innocent. That's where my problem lies, right? Again, the pillar of white inferiority, the maintenance of white innocence, that's laid out right there in that example, okay? Then the essay shifts again, and he focuses on the birth of his nephew James, and love makes its appearance. He says, to be loved, baby, hard, at once, and forever. That shit sounds so 70s or so 60s to me, right? Like, to be loved, baby, hard, at once, and forever, to strengthen you against the loveless world. Remember that. I know how black it looks today for you. It looked bad that day, too. Yes, we were trembling. We have not stopped trembling yet. But if we had not loved each other, none of us would have survived. And now you must survive because we love you and for the sake of your children and your children's children. So love, the work that love is doing, particularly in this passage, is a mechanism for survival, right? He says love has allowed us to maintain ourselves in this lovely world, right? It allowed us to survive. Now you must survive. You must exhibit this love to your children and your children's children, right? And as he moves further throughout the reading, love makes another shift and it seeks to do other work. But this is the passage I believe that Jelani was mentioning, right? He says, this innocent, again, here goes the innocence, this innocent country set you down in a ghetto in which, in fact, it intended that you should perish. Let me spell out precisely what I mean by that. For the heart of the matter is here, and the root of my disputes with my country. You were born where you were born, and faced the future that you faced, because you were black and for no other reason. The limits of your ambition were thus expected to be set forever. You were born into a society which spelled out with brutal clarity, and in as many ways as possible, that you are a worthless human being. You were not expected to aspire to excellence. You were expected to make peace with mediocrity. That's extremely profound to me. So you were born in the Nickerson Garden projects. You were born in the jungles. You were born on the Jordan Downs projects for no other reason but because you were black. You were born in East Los Angeles between Breed and Soto strictly because you were indigenous. And due to these realities, due to these facts, you're expected to be at peace with being mediocre. The reality of your world cannot go beyond the 110, the 10, the 1, and the 105. Right? You're supposed to make peace with these circumstances. You cannot see anything beyond what's in front of you, which is this ghetto. In fact, you're intended to perish right here. This is part of Baldwin's dispute with his country, right? He says the details and the symbols of your life have been deliberately constructed to make you believe what white people say about you. So for me, this is the other pillar of white inferiority, the white imagination. So the white imagination contrives these details, these symbols that pertain to this ontological understanding of blackness that black people and the rest of the world buy into, right? Black people are to be feared. Black people are a threat. So what I'll do is I'll make a news cycle that constantly promotes this idea that black folks are things to be feared. Black folks are thugs. They steal. So what we'll do is we'll create a series of movies, a series of music, a series of television that all reinforces this idea or this notion that black folks are thugs, right? These are the details, these are the symbols that are constructed to make you believe what white people say about you, right? Now we get the shift again as it pertains to the work that love can do. He says you must accept them and accept them with love. For these innocent people have no other hope. They are in effect still trapped in a history they do not understand. And until they understand it, they cannot be, released from it, right? So the love that black people can express to these people who are trapped by this lack of understanding of history is the only hope for these people, or in other words, the only hope for humanity. Now, what I do want to overemphasize, when Baldwin is saying love, he's not talking about like, let's get together and make mixed children. That's not, it's not this romantic notion of love, right? It's a harsh love, it's tough love, it's an uncomfortable love. A love that strips you down and shows you your true self, right? Oftentimes, Baldwin uses mirrors, water, windows to show this work that love does. Because if you think about a mirror, if you think about the water, if you think about a window, oftentimes they reflect your image back to you. They show you who you are. And he says love should do the same, right? So the love that Baldwin is talking about that black folks should express to white folks should show them who they truly are. Another famous quote by Baldwin is, if I love you, I must make you conscious of the things you're unaware of, right? So again, this is a love that's situated in a harsh truth, okay? So not only is this a book of pedagogy, right? As it says in the video, showing all black nephews, sons, daughters, etc., how to survive America. This is a book of prophecy. The book is entitled The Fire Next Time. Who knows the story of Noah? Noah and the Ark. Anyone familiar?
Yeah.
Nathaniel, can you kind of break down real briefly what the story of Noah is, please?
Well, God wants to flood the earth because of all the sins. So he chooses a farmer who's Noah, and then he tells him to gather all these certain animals and to build a large ship. So when he like floods the earth with the water, he could survive with all the animals. And then Noah ends up building the ark, and then he puts all the different animals in, and they end up surviving, and then the world starts anew.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. That's a great, it's a great explanation of Noah. I would have said a lot more colorful, a lot more explicit, but I like the way that you laid that out for us. So we all have this understanding of the story of Noah, okay? Here is Baldwin producing this book in 1963. Think about what's happening in 1963. We're in the middle of the civil rights era, right? So civil rights, we have black folks, African people organizing, mobilizing, and advocating for integration, right? But they're doing it at a means that's peaceful, that's situated in this idea, this notion of love, right? We have the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, I believe they were titled, which was led by Martin Luther King. We have groups like SNCC. We have just a host of organizations that's seeking to push this idea of integration and nonviolence forward. Baldwin is very familiar and very close with Dr. King. But remember, Baldwin is from Harlem, New York. Who else during this time is making his presence known in Harlem, New York in the 60s? Anyone know?
Malcolm X.
Yep. So on the other hand, we have Malcolm. So remember, Baldwin's from Harlem. So he's very familiar with Malcolm. He's very familiar with what they call the Black Muslims, or which accurately is called the Nation of Islam. In fact, on the second essay in this book, Baldwin writes about his meeting with Elijah Muhammad, who was at the time the head of the Nation of Islam. Second in command was Malcolm X. And they discuss tactics, and they discuss strategies, and they discuss desires, right? The strategy, tactic, and desire of the Nation of Islam is vastly different from the Civil Rights Movement. The Nation of Islam says, we want separation. Give us 8 to 12 southern states. We'll take all the black folks, we'll move to those states, and we'll build our own economic power base. We'll establish this idea of black nationalism, right? So Baldwin is also familiar with Malcolm and the Nation of Islam. So he sits in the middle. And he produces this text, The Fire Next Time. I'm going to read to you how he closes out the book. Not what you guys read, but the whole book. And think about Noah. Baldwin states, if we, and now I mean the relatively conscious whites, and the relatively conscious blacks, who must, like lovers, insist on or create the consciousness of the other, do not falter in our duty now, we may be able, handful that we are, to end the racial nightmare and achieve our country and change the history of the world. If we do not now dare everything, the fulfillment of that prophecy, recreated from the Bible in song by a slave, is upon us. God gave Noah the rainbow sign. No more water, the fire next time. So we'll take what Daniel told us about Noah. We know that Noah was tasked to repopulate the earth with his family. This is why he put 2 and 2 of each animal, so we can kind of start over, as Nathaniel said, right? But God warns Noah. Humanity fucked up, so I had to flood their ass, right? I'm calling on you to restart. But Noah, homie, if you fuck this up, no more water. It's the fire. I'm burning all this shit down, right? So Baldwin is attentive to this reality. And he's attentive to his position within the black movement, right? And he's paying attention to what's going on with the civil rights movement. The violence that they're enacting on the civil rights movement. The murder of Medgar Evers, right? The upcoming murder of Dr. King. And Baldwin is telling America, yo, America, if y'all ain't listening to this water, if y'all not listening to this civil rights struggle that's trying to do it the peaceful way, the fire is coming. The Nation of Islam is coming. They're mobilizing. They're organizing people. They're changing people's minds. And they're not with this loving integration shit. They trying to do it different, right? The fire is coming. And for anyone who is astute to hit the history of the 60s, we know that that fire comes. We know that in 1965, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz is murdered. We know the very next year, in 1966, in Oakland, California, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense is birthed. That fire that Baldwin is warning, it comes. So not only is this a book of pedagogy, right, of instructions, of folklore, of funds of knowledge, right? It's also a book of prophecy, a book of warning for America to sustain herself, to listen to this water that's the civil rights movement, and to warn them of the impending doom of the Black Power era. So once we get through with our midterms, we'll transition into the civil rights movement, the Nation of Islam, and the Black Power era, focusing on Huey P. Newton and Stokely Carmichael. Also, tomorrow's extra credit opportunity will be focused on the civil rights transition from nonviolence into Black power into ultimately Pan-Africanism. So they'll kind of give you a precursor to where we're going as a class if you attend tomorrow's guest lecture. I'm going to put my notes on pause there. We'll transition into our fishbowl. Remember, you could talk about my notes. You could talk about the video we just watched. You could talk about your breakout rooms or your journal, all that's on the table. You have to have 2 a semester. Who would like to volunteer? All right. So I will call. Go ahead, Nathaniel. Do you want to volunteer?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So I could talk about.
Give me one. Let me get the other people, then we'll let you start. Okay. Give me 1 second. So
I'll volunteer.
Serena. Thank you, Serena. Anyone else?
I can volunteer as well.
And Nicole. So that will be our 3. We'll have Nathaniel, Serena, and Nicole. Whoever would like to start it off, it's on you.
Yeah, I could start off.
Okay.
So I could talk about like what you talked about right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like as you said, the author he's angry at that all these people are suffering, because like many people are suffering, and the main oppressors are like the white people. And he talks about like love, and then he talks about how you have to be at peace with being mediocre, how Black people have to be at peace with being mediocre, not excellence, just because of based on where they was born. You give specific examples, the jungles, and then you talk about how saying that just by being Black, you're going to be born in a certain place and be looked at a certain way. You talk about how like people like they make movies, books, shows, etc. To show how Black people must be feared and like to look at Black people a certain way. And then Baldwin talks about harsh love. He uses examples such as water, mirror, windows. Then he uses those examples because they reflect, and he says that love should reflect on who you are. And Baldwin like expresses that Black people and white people should show that kind of love to each other. And then Baldwin, he produces this book in 1963, around the civil rights era, along with and he hosts organizations pushing this nonviolence act, and he meets up with Malcolm X and the main leader of the Nation of Islam. And then so Islam during that time, they basically want 8 states to themselves, like and then all the Black people can be there and they can build up the economy themselves. But what's it called? Baldwin Baldwin comes up with something else. But like in all, Baldwin talks about how just like with love people could live together, and then in in the reading, he talks about his nephew, about racism in America, and he talks about how his brother felt like he was worthless, and the author explains the struggle and fear of growing up and how it affected his brother a lot more than it did to him.
Thank you for that. Who's next?
I can go next.
Okay.
As I was reading a letter to my nephew, I was struck by how poetic the language was. And it seemed like Baldwin must have been instrumental in raising his brother, because he took like almost like kind of a paternal tone when he was talking about that. And I thought it was interesting how he compares the kind of the fate of African Americans to characters in Charles Dickens, because I thought that actually some African Americans in the 60s and before that might actually have had it even worse. And then there is a quote in the reading that says, if you know from whence you came, there is no limit to where you can go. I thought that was really profound. I was also struck by how Baldwin just shows a lot of empathy for like racist white people. And I think that shows a lot of maturity and like emotional strength, because I don't know if I could do that. Like, I feel like that's just really admirable that he's able to like empathize, like just say this isn't all about just like white people victimizing people of color, but about, you know, they're victims of this ideology too, kind of. And then there's a quote at the end that says, "We cannot be free until they are free." And I wasn't sure what that referred to, but I thought maybe it referred to like saying, well, white people need to be liberated in the struggle too, as well as Black people, but I'm not sure. Those were my notes on the reading.
Okay, I'm gonna let Nicole go, Serena, and I'll come back to address your question. Okay.
So I kind of wanted to talk about like our breakout room. I kind of just, when I read about the letter to my nephew, I know that it outlines like the race issues in like America from like kind of like his firsthand perspective, you know. It explains like the struggles and the fears that he grows up, and then he talks about it like how it transforms into the new meaning as he like began to grow older. So I wanted to also like agree with like Serena about how when he mentions like talks about his brother, the father of the nephew, you could kind of see the change of like the tone and everything. Not only that, but I had like kind of like a question, because reading towards the middle when he talks about like the grandma, talks about how like they don't know, the countrymen don't know that she exists. So I was kind of like confused about that in a way as well. Like, what is that kind of like existing, not existing? I was confused about that.
Okay. Let me do that real quick. Let me do that, and I'll work back to Serena. Find this. And it says something to the effect of, "Oh, how bitter you are. That's not true." There we go. All right. So I'm gonna read it and then I'll discuss it, because it's also engages the Charles Dickens quote. It says, "Now, my dear namesake, these innocent and well-meaning people, your countrymen, have caused you to be born under conditions not very far removed from those described for us by Charles Dickens in the London of more than 100 years ago. I hear the chorus of the innocent screaming, 'No, this is not true. How bitter you are.' I'm not writing you this letter to try to tell you something about how to handle them. For most of them do not really know that you exist. I know the conditions under which you were born, for I was there. Your countrymen were not, and haven't made it yet. Your grandmother was also there, and no one has ever accused her of being bitter. I suggest that the innocence check with her. She isn't hard to find. Your countrymen don't know that she exists either, though she has been working for them all their lives, okay? So it's a lot going on. But one, this the counter, right? No, you're so bitter. Let slavery go. That was 400 years ago. We're not doing stuff like that now. Stop living in the past, right? He's saying, listen, I'm not telling you how to handle them. That's not what I'm here to tell you. Because they don't even really know what our conditions are like. They don't know what it's like to grow up in the ghetto, right? They don't know what it's like to be hopeless and to be at peace with your mediocrity, right? They don't know. But they cannot say that your grandmother was bitter, right? Because what's the grandma? She's taking them back in history, right? She's taking them back into a time that they seek to forget, right? He says, she was there, right? But they pretend as if she wasn't there either, right? So they don't even know what the grandmother situation was. They don't visit that part of New York, right? They ain't going to Harlem to know how the black folks are living in Harlem. So they don't know that you even exist, even though you travel from Harlem to Queens to go work for them every day. They still don't know that you exist. Does that make a little more sense for you, Nicole?
Yeah, I misinterpreted it.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. And then so Serena says she questions the sense that this claim that we must free white folks in order to free black folks. This is what Baldwin is getting at with this. Because of the power dynamics, right? The white folks are the perpetrators of the violence. So Baldwin argues the only way that we'll get them to stop perpetrating violence, to allow us as a people to be free, is to get them to understand who they are, right? To show them that mirror, right? To show them that history that they seek to forget, to let them know that you are not innocent, right? In fact, my very presence and my very status within this country embodies your guilt, right? So until that white folks can come to terms with what they're doing to the rest of the world, nobody will be free. And this is why that love for Baldwin is so essential, because he says that's the only hope. He says we're their only hope, because they're not going to do the work themselves. Serena, does that make a little more sense for you?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, bet. So what I would like to do with the time that we have left, I want to really piggyback what Baldwin may be offering as a solution to this racial problem, right? This love that he's talking about. And for me, when I think about the dynamics, the racial dynamics between black folks and white folks, I liken it to an abusive relationship or a bully on the schoolyard, right? So if we are to use the abusive relationship example, there's only a few things that you could do in an abusive relationship. You either stay and continue to get your ass whooped, you leave, which is own danger within itself, or you possibly fight back, which is another form of danger, right? I personally don't have any experience with abusive relationships, but I do have experiences with bullies, right? In my personal experience with bullies, the only thing that bullies respond to is punching them in their motherfucking mouth. That's just what I found to have worked, right? You can try to run, you can try to hide, you can try to do all that. Even if you lose the fight with them, it's going to change the way that they interact with you. They don't think twice about trying to take your lunch money, trying to take your sneakers, your hat, whatever, right? Because they know at least he will put up a fight, right? So if we were to take these examples and apply it to what Baldwin is trying to get us to understand as his viable solution for the racial situation, Is that a viable solution? How many of y'all are willing to love the person who's abusing you in the relationship? How many are you are willing to love your bully, even if it's that rough love that Baldwin is talking about? How viable of a solution is that for y'all?
It's a lot of work.
A lot of work.
You know, you're doing a double duty because you're trying to educate your own family and people, and then you spending the rest of the days. You know, I know this plays out in the office a lot when there's only one or two Black workers and everyone thinks you're the encyclopedia of Black knowledge, and you've got to explain everything, and people just shut that down, saying that's not my job. You have to do your own work. Tired of educating you every day.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison, Jelani. That the duality of having to play educator and just be, right? That's a great way of putting it. It's a lot of work. Anyone else? Is this a viable solution? Would you guys be
I think
willing?
it's a good ideal, but I think that sometimes when people are being abused, they don't have that love to give. They don't have that kind of resources to love their abuser.
Yeah. And also, right, the question of survival. Like, yeah, you could love and you could love and you could love, but when you constantly getting your ass whooped, like that ass whooping can lead to death, right? So how do you reconcile trying to show them this patience, try to show them this persistence, try to show them this love while continuously getting beat? It makes me think about the Wu-Tang line, turn your other cheek and I'll break your chin, right? Like, to me, it's the same premise that we've been going through. Then you think that this was written in 63, written in 63. No one can argue that the issues that Baldwin articulates in 1963 are prevalent and relevant today, right? I would say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we've been doing this love thing that Baldwin is advocating for quite some time. If this is true, how effective has it been? Real question. Has it worked? Real life example of this. Anybody familiar with Botham Jean or Amber Geiger? That situation in Texas? No? Okay. I want to say 2 years ago, maybe. Yeah, about 2 years ago. Dallas, Texas. There's an off-duty police officer by the name of Amber Geiger returning home from her 12-hour shift.
Yeah.
It was late. If I'm not mistaken, her apartment was on the 4th floor. She finds herself on the 5th floor. She bypasses the signs that tell her that this is on level 5, this is level 4. She bypasses the fact that her neighbor randomly has a big plant in front of their house that they never had before. She bypasses the fact that her house doesn't have a doormat, but this house does. Long day, right? She goes to the door is slightly ajar, opens the door. Lo and behold, we have Botham Jean in his apartment complex, watching TV, eating a bowl of ice cream. Botham Jean sees his door open, so naturally he gets up off his couch. And once he rises off the couch, Amber Geiger grabs her service weapon and fires shots, killing Botham Jean. Time goes on, the trial plays out. At the time, I was in Dallas, Texas, visiting my brother, so I'm watching it. I'm like, oh shit, it's a black judge. This is abnormal, but let's see how this plays out. So they go through the trial. So oftentimes when these circumstances come up, it's a character comparison, right? Oftentimes when they have these character comparisons, even the victim, if they occupy a black body, will be depicted as violent, as the aggressor, as a societal pariah, right? Even if they're the victim. But Botham Jean was flawless. They could find no dirt on his name. He was a missionary. He was from Haiti, so he would travel and spread the word of God. In fact, his neighbors would say when he woke up on Sunday mornings, they would wake up to the sound of Botham Jean singing gospel music, right? So his character was impeccable. But they do the same thing for Amber Geiger, talk about how much of an upstanding citizen she was. You know, her parents loved her, yada, yada, yada. It comes time for the verdict. The verdict is guilty. Like, oh shit, come through, black judge. So I think. Then it comes to sentencing. The minimum she gets the minimum. I want to say 5 years. With the then she gets later on the availability for early parole. And this is where it gets interesting for me. The black judge comes off her stand, hands Amber Geiger a Bible, gives her a hug, and tells her, I'll be praying for you. That's interesting. I ain't never seen a judge engage anybody, let alone hug them, give them a Bible, and tell them I'll pray for you. The fuck? Fast forward, the family of Botham Jean, right? Upstanding Haitians, Christians, and they're all talking about how much they forgive her, how much they pray for her soul, how much they want reconciliation. They didn't want her to get a long sentence, right? And I'm just watching this, I'm thinking like, what the fuck? How do you get to a point where you are accepting of your son, your brother, your cousin being murdered, and you are still in a space of love and forgiveness for his murderer? So much so that you're happy that their sentencing has been reduced. Now, I don't know if I can say equivocally that what they were doing is the same type of love that Baldwin's talking about. I don't believe so. I don't believe so. But there is something to be said about this notion of forgiveness that Black people seem to embody that's strongly tied with notions of Christianity. To me, that I view as problematic. Because people will do what you allow them to do, right? And there's only one thing that power understands and responds to. What is that? What is the one thing that power understands and responds to? Force, okay. But in order to have that force, what do you need to have in place? Do you know?
Power.
Thank you, Serena. The only thing that power is moved by or responds to is more power. If you study revolution, if you study political movements, if you study historical changes, right? If you study how civilizations rise and fall, it all comes down to power. And if we're not dealing with that, love ain't gonna do shit for you. If you ain't dealing with power, forgiveness ain't gonna do shit for you. All you're gonna be is a meek motherfucker getting punked, right? So, as we transition and we shift, we're gonna question this notion of power, right? Black folks begin to question this idea of power because they realize that this nonviolence, that ain't work. We got crushed. While we was nonviolent, they was fucking us up. So we got to do something different, right? So when we get back from our midterms, we'll start to engage that a little bit. Tomorrow's extra credit opportunity will engage that a little bit. I will not be assigning any readings for you guys this week. Tomorrow or Friday, I will send out the midterm review study guides on on Wednesday of next week, we'll spend some time going over that. We'll cover your theoretical frameworks and what have you. And then Thursday of next week, I'll email you out the midterm. And then by Monday of the following week, which I believe is November 2nd, you will be expected to submit your midterm and submit your journals as well. So make sure you have those. I will also, when we do our midterm review, go through my notes to see who's fishbowled, and I'll let everybody know who has 2 fishbowls, who has 1 fishbowl, and who has none, so that way you'll know what you have to do for the remainder of the semester, and then we'll keep it rolling from there. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns?